Apple didn't just take its time with a foldable iPhone. It may have played one of the smartest long games in smartphone history. And now, it looks like Samsung is the one under pressure. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing you more tech breakdowns like this one. For years, people kept asking the same question: where is Apple's foldable? While companies like Samsung pushed forward with devices like the Galaxy Z Fold 7, Apple stayed completely silent. No rushed release, no experimental models, just patience. And now we're starting to understand why that might have been the plan all along. This matters because foldables are supposed to be the next big thing in smartphones. Samsung has spent years refining the category, fixing durability issues, improving hinges, reducing screen creases. They've essentially trained the market, educated users, and absorbed all the early mistakes. But here's the twist. Apple may have let Samsung do all that work, so it could step in at the perfect moment. Instead of copying the standard book-style fold we've seen on most devices, Apple is reportedly going in a completely different direction. The foldable iPhone is expected to adopt a wider, more tablet-like design, closer to something like the Huawei Pura X, rather than the tall, narrow layout of current foldables. That change might sound small, but it actually shifts the entire user experience. When unfolded, the device is rumored to feel more like an iPad than a stretched phone. That means better multitasking, more natural app layouts, and a more practical use of the larger screen. And here's where things get interesting. Samsung has already reacted. Reports suggest that Samsung is now working on a wide fold device of its own, possibly alongside the Galaxy Z Fold 8. That's a pretty big signal. It shows Apple hasn't even launched yet, and it's already influencing the direction of its biggest competitor. But design isn't the only pressure point. Pricing might be the real shock here. For the longest time, the assumption was simple. Apple's foldable would be extremely expensive, easily more than anything Samsung offers. But leaks suggest a starting price of around $2,000. And if that number holds, it puts Apple directly in line with Samsung's foldables. That completely changes the game. Samsung can't rely on being the more affordable option anymore. And when you remove price as a differentiator, the competition shifts to ecosystem, performance, and overall experience, which are areas where Apple is historically very strong. Speaking of performance, the rumored specs don't look like a first-generation experiment either. The foldable iPhone is expected to come with 12 gigabytes of RAM and at least 256 gigabytes of storage, basically matching what Samsung already offers. But the real highlight is the chip, Apple's upcoming A20 Pro, built on a 2-nanometer process. That's cutting edge even by Apple standards. On top of that, there's a heavy focus on durability, arguably the biggest weakness of foldables so far. Apple is reportedly using a much more advanced hinge system and significantly reducing the visibility of the display crease. And that's important because crease visibility has been one of the biggest complaints with foldables, even as companies have improved it year after year. But maybe the most underrated advantage Apple has is experience without risk. Think about it. Samsung has spent years releasing foldables to the public, and along the way there have been cracked screens, hinge failures, and durability concerns, even with newer models. Apple, on the other hand, has been watching from the sidelines. It's seen what works, what fails, and what users actually care about. It didn't have to deal with the early backlash, it just learned from it. So, instead of being first, Apple is aiming to be refined. And that's what makes this feel less like a late entry and more like a calculated move, because now Samsung is in a tricky position. It has to keep innovating fast enough to stay ahead, but also react to Apple's new direction at the same time. That's not easy, especially in a category that's already complex and expensive to develop. In a way, Apple has turned Samsung's years of innovation into its own advantage. Samsung built the market. Apple is stepping in to redefine it. And whether the foldable iPhone becomes a massive success,